Hi guys, welcome back to Biological Anthropology, also known as Physical Anthropology. In today's little mini lecture, and in fact this is not even really a true mini lecture, it's just some additional thoughts. I want to talk about anatomically modern Homo sapien origins a little bit more. So we reviewed the two models in our textbook and the evidence we should expect to find that to support each of them in our last mini lecture. And just as a reminder, we expected to find certain things in the replacement model that were different than the multi-regional model. So as you recall, the replacement model suggests that anatomically modern Homo sapien emerges in Africa around 200,000 years ago. So we have a population of hominins living in Africa, some sort of different changes in their evolutionary forces, right? Gene flow, genetic drift, natural selection, sexual selection allows for these changes that we characterized as anatomically modern Homo sapiens. And as that population grows and splits and becomes larger and splits again over these various generations, they move out of Africa into Asia, all the way through Southeast Asia into Australia and then into Europe, dominating and replacing hominins in those areas. So we should expect to see that these modern Homo sapiens, as they move out, would be quite distinct. They're a new form coming in so they're going to be different from those other hominins in those regions. In terms of genetics, we would expect to see differences between Neanderthals and archaic Homo sapiens from these anatomically modern Homo sapiens. We would also expect to see these transitional forms from archaic into modern only or primarily in Africa. Furthermore, in terms of archaeological evidence, you would expect to find somewhat abrupt changes in technology and behavior. So this new population would probably be bringing with it maybe better techniques at hunting or better techniques at making stone tools, maybe better social manners that allow them to become that dominant hominin. And that model is very different than the multi-regional model, which suggests that we have the emergence of anatomically modern Homo sapiens occurring over time without that clear distinction from other hominins in each region. So in other words, we have no one clear place for anatomically modern Homo sapiens to emerge, but from these variations in these populations of hominins in Europe, in Asia, in Africa, you have enough gene flow occurring that as time passes and generations pass, and we get genetic drift, gene flow, natural selection, and sexual selection occurring, these changes in frequency of these genes and traits change enough to make it into a new type of human or hominin, anatomically modern Homo sapien. And in that case, you would expect to find these regions having distinct local variations. So within Asia, for example, you would expect to see, instead of having an Asian hominin and then in comes an African one replacing them, you'd see continuity in that region. So modern Homo sapiens in that region would not be that much different from those earlier hominins in that same region. So in terms of genetics, those fossils should show that regional continuity of genetic traits. We should find those transitional fossils in each region, and we should find evidence of behavioral continuity. In other words, they're continuing their local traditions. Now we want to think about additional new evidence. So as I mentioned before, most paleoanthropologists find that the evidence points to a replacement model. The multi-regional model is not as clear-cut in terms of evidence, and so we have much less support for the multi-regional model. But we have some newer forms of evidence which is discussed in your textbook. In 2012, a paper was published about the genetic sequence of an individual from a particular cave called Denisova Cave. And in this, where's my pen? Oh, there it is. There it is. In this cave here, they actually found a tiny finger bone, and using that finger bone, they were able to sequence DNA from it. So that finger bone was about 30 to 48,000 years old. And they were thinking that they would either find Neanderthal or Homo sapiens DNA in that finger bone, but what they actually found when they looked at it was that it was neither Neanderthal nor anatomically modern Homo sapiens, but a different type altogether. And so they've come to calling this group the Denisovans, from the name of the cave. So it's not clearly a different species, but it's different enough to give it a sort of a generic name now. And what we see here is that these Denisovans would have mated with the, or would have had a common ancestor with Neanderthals about 80,000 years ago. And that common ancestor then diverged into the Denisovans and the Neanderthals. And prior to that, we have modern day anatomically modern Homo sapiens, differentiating themselves from that group that then becomes Denisovans and Neanderthals. So we see, this is a really interesting find, that maybe in these fossils we'll start to find that there's more splits in here than we knew about before. Interestingly enough, these Denisovans mated with both Neanderthals and with anatomically modern Homo sapiens. And it's, I say interesting because Melanesians, who live down here, share some DNA from Denisovans. So they have that ancestry from those Denisovans, whereas most other anatomically modern Homo sapiens do not. So the picture of gene flow in this period, in this anatomically modern Homo sapien period, will likely change and shift as we get better DNA or ancient DNA evidence from these bones. What else do we know? Well, we also know about Neanderthals. The sequencing of that Neanderthal genome suggests that interbreeding occurred between 47 and 65,000 years ago. The very first publication of that Neanderthal genome showed us that there was admixture. In other words, that Neanderthals mated with anatomically modern Homo sapiens, but there wasn't enough mating to make sort of a hybrid. Instead, the Neanderthals were dying out, but enough of that Neanderthal DNA got passed into our lineage that we have ancestry we can trace that ancestry through our DNA. So thinking about this newer genetic evidence, we have the emergence of a third model, and the current sort of working title of this model is the assimilation model. And the main idea here is that Africa is most likely the site of evolution of anatomically modern Homo sapien features around 200,000 years ago. We see these features that we count as modern emerging in a population. So chin, forehead, gracile, long limb, these sort of ideas start to coalesce. And they move out as the population grows and splits, moving out first to the east and eventually then into Europe. And on the way, they meet other hominins, like the Neanderthals in Europe and the Denisovans in sort of Central Asia. And then those groups were assimilated or absorbed into that anatomically modern Homo sapien population through interbreeding. So the assimilation model says, yes, we have a common origin in Africa, like that replacement model, but it also suggests that there's more interbreeding going on along the way as anatomically modern Homo sapien moves out. So So when we look at the data from the chapter again, looking at the fossil record, looking at the tools and technology in the archaeological record, and looking at the genetic data, you can ask yourselves again, do you think this model is supported by the evidence? Here again is a comparison of these three models that we've looked at. The multi-regional model with its gene flow between these regions, the replacement model where there is no gene flow between these. Instead, Africa is that site of emergence of the new species that then moves out and replaces everybody else. And then here we have the assimilation model, which was really just an adaptation of that replacement model, saying that yes, there was some gene flow in each of these regions, and it's a more complicated gene flow than we recognized previously. Just a couple other things to ponder. Some features that we're talking about in terms of anatomically modern Homo sapiens are quite unique to us as a hominin species. We have a bulbous skull. Our head looks like a light bulb. We have that canine fossa, which you don't find in Neanderthals. You don't find in archaic Homo sapiens. We have a prominent chin. In fact, you can get a chin implant if you feel like your chin is not prominent enough. Some other features that we have are not that unique. So I talked about the teeth of Neanderthals, for example. About 11% of anatomically modern Homo sapiens have a middle trigonoid crest on their lower molars, which is a particular sort of bulge there. And this bulge, or this crest, is found on all of the Neanderthal fossils. But interestingly, about 11% of moderns have it. So here I have a pencil sharpener that my friend made me. She is a dental technician. Let me get the light right here on it. Ooh, that's too bright. She's a dental technician, and she makes like dentures and things. So she made me this giant molar pencil holder. But it's interesting, she made it without this trigonoid crest. You can't really see it on here. So most of us don't have it, but about 11% do. So that's sort of one of those things. What else? Let's see. Oh, our shovel-shaped incisors. Some populations of modern Homo sapiens have that shovel-shaped incisor as well. So even though we have some features that are unique to us as moderns, we have some other features that we find in Neanderthals or in Denisovans, and possibly in these other yet unknown fossil forms. So when we think about those, we can also ask ourselves, do these features suggest that we have shared ancestry or that there's intermingling going on? So do modern humans have this crest on their tooth because we have a common ancestor with the Neanderthals, or is it because we mated with Neanderthals later? That sort of question is something that paleoanthropologists have to ask themselves. So now from reading chapter 13 and thinking about these issues, you should start to grasp how we put together these various pieces of evidence to solve the puzzle of how modern humans evolved. The picture of evolution is always shifting and changing as we get new evidence and reposition our puzzle pieces together. And so it's always fun and exciting, and science here is a process rather than a result. Okay, so in our next mini lecture, we're going to talk about how modern humans moved out of the old world and eventually conquered the rest of it. I'll see you there.